Thank you, Miss Paul. Now, Mr. Runke, do you wish to speak to the jury? I do, and I will ask Mr. Anelli to switch to the laptop on defense table, and hopefully the technology will work, and we will see. Would you change the lights if you will? It should be on the screen in front of you. We'll go with what we have. Ladies and gentlemen, do you have that on the screen in front of you? I want to remind you again of my name. My name is David Runke. I'm an attorney. My partner John Barrett and I have been given the responsibility of conducting the defense of Damion Hardy and to bring to you information that you need to make the important decision that has been committed to you by signing on as jurors. As Judge Block told you, we have been appointed by the court in that role. We are pleased and honored to accept the role of defending Damion Hardy. You just heard an opening by the government, and there were some remarkable things about that opening. One of the aspects of the opening is it was quite long on where the government wants this journey to end. It was quite long on where the government wants you to end up at the end of the process. It was quite short on how they are going to get there. It was quite short on the nature of the evidence. To an unusual degree, to a high degree, the evidence you are going to hear in this case comes from the mouths of cooperating defendants. I guess is the best way to describe them. People who are going to ask you to simply trust their word to a high degree. There will be no evidence past the word of cooperating witnesses as to what occurred, as to who was involved, as to what the motives were. You will not see any DNA evidence about murders. You will not hear any murders being planned over a telephone intercepted conversation. You will not see any surveillance video of Mr. Hardy committing any crimes. You will simply be stuck with the word of people whose word you wouldn't take for today is Wednesday, if you were in your own environment. People who have laughed at society's rules for their whole lives. People whom the government says basically, although they would kill, although they would rob, although they would scam, although they would steal, they stop short of telling a lie in court. And every motive in the world to lie is placed on these folks. So let me see the next slide down, please. You'll hear words that you are not overly familiar with. And I'm going to go through some of these words that are going to come up throughout the testimony of the witnesses. And I want to start with the end of the list, which is death penalty. No one in this case is facing the death penalty. These two gentlemen on trial do not face the death penalty. However, as you know, if you are following the Boston case, we don't have a death penalty in New York, but the federal government does. And you'll find out from their testimony that several of the witnesses who come before you, in fact, could have faced the death penalty, were exposed to the death penalty, committed crimes that could potentially implicate the death penalty. And we're going to go in reverse order. The next term up above that is mandatory life. Mandatory life. You'll learn that in the federal system, there is no parole. And you'll learn that there are certain crimes that carry with it a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment. The judge has no role in it, and it's only under certain circumstances that somebody can get out from under that kind of sentence. And many of the witnesses who you will hear from face mandatory life in prison terms. You'll see the term 5K 1.1. You'll hear the term 5K. You'll hear it described as a 5K letter. You'll hear it described as a 5K motion. The witnesses themselves are conversant with exactly what that means. And here is the payoff for cooperation. As I told you, Many of the crimes with which folks have been charged here who will be testifying carry with it mandatory life sentences. If you are found guilty, you go to prison. You die there. You do not come out. There is no parole. There is one and only one way around that. And that is if the government goes to bat for you, and if the government files what is known as a 5K letter, which says, "Judge, this person has been cooperative, and we ask the court to consider the cooperation, and you now have the discretion not to sentence this person to life." This is the prize. This is what is at the end of the rainbow for the cooperating witnesses. They have entered into plea agreements, which means we promise to do certain things, and the witness and the government then promises to do certain things back, which is to move the judge to display some kind of leniency towards the witness. That is what is at stake here. And the government's theory and argument here is that, well, they are now motivated to tell the truth because this is the only way that they are going to get the deal. Consider it from the mindset of a witness. Objection. Sit down. Overruled. Go ahead. Consider it from the mindset of a witness who has manipulated and flaunted the law and defied society's norms their entire life. Their motive is, how do I get this deal? What do I have to do to get this deal? And you'll learn from the evidence that is presented that many of the witnesses started off telling one version of events, then later on changed it to another version of events. You'll hear some evidence that witnesses had engaged in criminal activity after making a deal with the government, kept their deal, and were allowed to continue on with their cooperation agreement in the hope of getting a deal down the road. Next slide. So these are some of the people you will meet or hear about. Remember just a few minutes ago when Ms. Paul told you about a gentleman named Boo and a murder he had committed. Boo is going to be one of the first people who you meet in this case from the witness stand. Everybody has a nickname, and I just can't begin to tell you how difficult sometimes it's going to be for all of us to follow testimony about what Boo and Rab and Taz did while out with Kissy, and just very difficult to follow. You are going to hear a lot of that, and trying to keep track of the cast of characters is going to go a challenge for all of us. But you'll hear evidence about Dwayne Myers, named Thor, committed murder. Edward Cook, his girlfriend Kissy Clayton, an unusual name. You heard Miss Paul talk to you about a man who shot someone named Munchie 10 times, put him in a wheelchair for life. That is Robert Footman, who you will also hear from as a witness. His nickname is Trub, as in trouble. You'll hear from a man named LaShawn Campbell. Mr. Campbell's specialty was robberies, robbing people on the street, taking their property with an unusual MO. Would walk up behind people, put them in a chokehold, render them unconscious. While they were unconscious, he would take their property. This is the government's witness, LaShawn Campbell. And I want to talk to you about how the government can go about proving a case if it has more than the word of cooperating witnesses. And I want to talk about Edward Cook, Taz, who is on that list, and his girlfriend Kissy. Here's what happened with Edward Cook and Kissy. They tried to do a 6-kilo cocaine purchase. They were going to buy 6 kilograms of cocaine. Unfortunately for them, they met up, hooked up with an individual who was acting as an informant, for it turns out to be the Department of Homeland Security, who tape-recorded phone calls with them while the deal was being set up so that is on record. You can listen to those phone calls if you want and say, yeah, they are talking about a drug deal here. But listen to this. On the day that this 6 kilogram was set to go down, the federal government had a helicopter hanging over a parking lot in Brooklyn for a couple of hours, surveilling the whole thing. They watched the deal go up. They watched Kissy Clayton and they watched Edward Cook, Taz, arrive at the scene. And then everybody met inside a large SUV, which was wired for sound and sight, so that every bit of the crime and every bit of the transaction was video recorded, tape recorded, so you don't have to take anyone's word for what happened inside the SUV that day. You don't have to take anybody's word for what was going on. And I respectfully suggest to you, as you listen to this case unfold, you are going to be asking yourself, where is that evidence? So let's look at some of these folks. Upper left-hand corner, that is Taz. That is Edward Cook. And all of these folks are going to be testifying as government witnesses. What do they have in common? They all come with long criminal records. What do they have in common? They have all made a deal with the government. And this is just a sample of the people you are going to hear from. So Taz is upper left. In the middle is a guy named Zare Sarkisian. They call him Puff. He was in on the murder of Tyrone Baum. The other guy in the upper group is Robert Footman, Trub. He was the one who shot Munchie 10 times and paralyzed him for life. In the lower left is Boo Alan Bryant, who you may even meet today or tomorrow. And in the lower right-hand corner, that is Thor. That is Dwayne Myers. Let me tell you about some of the deals that the government is capable of offering, based on evidence that you will hear in the case. You take Kissy Clayton, Taz's girlfriend. They are caught with the 6 kilogram cocaine deal that they are dead to rights on tape for. But there is more to it. When Tyrone Baum was murdered, you heard about his being released from jail and being murdered. His brother Daryl Baum had also been murdered. You'll hear Daryl referred to by his nickname, Homicide, an unusual nickname. But when they needed a gun to get to the scene of Kissy Clayton, of Tyrone Baum's murder, Taz calls up his girlfriend Kissy and says, "Get in a cab and bring the gun over here." So she is charged. She is an accessory to murder. She delivered the murder weapon. She is dead to rights on a 6 kilogram cocaine deal, and she is charged with lying to a federal officer. And that's all she winds up getting charged with, and is placed on probation, and Taz now becomes a government cooperator. So next slide. So questions you should really be asking yourself as you listen to the evidence is first, what is the source of this information? Where are you getting this information from? You say, well, there is the murder of Tyrone Baum. Let's figure out who was the source of the information. Ask yourself, what do I know about the source? Is this a reliable person? Is this just a citizen who happened to come upon something? Or is this somebody who is on the make? And you are going to be hearing some people I suggest respectfully you will find from the evidence who are on the make. Ask if there is backup. Is there corroboration? What backs this up? And if somebody is a liar or somebody disregards the truth habitually, to say, well, there are other liars who back him up isn't really getting us very far. Is it really just a matter of you're being asked to trust people who, if this was something important to you, you wouldn't trust for 10 seconds of your lives? So the final slide is, And I'm the last one who should be defining what the law is. That is Judge Block's job. But you heard all through that the government has the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And all that means is that if at the end of the day, at the end of hearing all the evidence, you are not convinced personally and collectively as a jury of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, then you are required as a matter of your oaths as jurors to return a not guilty verdict. Not sure, beyond a reasonable doubt, very simple, not guilty. So as you can see, there are competing versions about what you are going to be hearing over the next 3 or 4 weeks. I appreciate your attention, and at the end of the case, either Ms. Barrett or I will be back to talk to you again. We are going to urge you at that time to return not guilty verdicts. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Runke. Mr.